Nice to meet you.
Hi. Okay. All right. I'm going to briefly introduce you and then welcome you up here. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, I'd like to welcome Mauricio Rocha to Colombia to lecture, and I also would like to extend a special welcome to our newly admitted students, whom I met most of earlier today. Mauricio is a unique kind of architect. His work exudes a strong command of the art in architecture. He started his office, Taller de Arquitectura, in 1990, and over the past 25 years has completed a number of buildings and installations which, one can say, are a kind of ephemeral architecture. His installations can be seen in relation to a particular artistic lineage, triangulating between the figures of Marcel Duchamp, Joseph Beuys, Gordon Matta Clark, and the Arte Povera movement, recovering found objects in order to decontextualize them and assign them a new meaning. At the same time, his buildings are steadfastly architectural, as visible by the clear and painstaking construction details, displaying a hybrid of Miesian attention to detail and honesty towards materials reminiscent of Louis Kahn. This is visible in projects like the Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, created as part of a program by the Mexico City government to provide services to one of the most disadvantaged and highly populated areas of the city, Iztapalapa, a district with the largest visually impaired population in the Mexican capital. The rammed earth and formwork-laden concrete speak to the ephemeral nature of his work and to the experience of being in a specific place with particular sounds, smells, and textures. His other acclaimed buildings include the House for Abandoned Children in Observatorio in Mexico City, the San Pablo Oaxaca Market in the Milpa Alta district in Mexico City as well, the Sayavedra House, and the School of Visual Arts in Oaxaca. It is almost auspicious timing that Mauricio joins us this week during the recently opened and breathtakingly beautiful, smart, and mind-blowing exhibition at the MoMA called Latin American in Construction 1955-1980, curated by Barry Bergdoll, who, along with Luis Carranza, will join us for a discussion after Mauricio's lecture. I should note that both of them are also teaching fantastic seminars on Latin American architecture and urbanism here this semester. And while the MoMA exhibition focuses on development and a strong faith in technological innovation, which took place from the periods of 1955 to 1980, Mauricio is part of the following generation, which seemed to maybe be critical of this faith in technological innovation and turned instead to also re-engage craft and natural materials, rammed earth, stone, as well as cast a new careful relationship to landscape and human scale with great sensibility and beauty. And so now I invite current and future GSAPP students, faculty, and everyone to please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mauricio Rocha.
Okay. Hello. For me, it's really great to be here in Colombia. And obviously, I came yesterday from Mexico, and I have all the morning walking to the exhibition of Latin America. That is amazing and with beautiful drawings and very nice contents. So in that context, I will talk about my work that I am making in Mexico. Okay, I begin with this photograph of my mother. My mother is Graciela Iturbide, that is a photographer, and I decided to put her work here because I think in this photograph is something that I really love to make in architecture. The possibility to make like a simple house and to have all the vegetation, all the accident of the life inside, outside of the same construction. And then begin with this intervention as as said before, I work in some installation, interventions, ephemeral, in the beginning of my career, because I'm very close of other conceptual artists in Mexico. And I try to begin with this piece that is very important for me. This is 93. We were a group of artists and some architects working in these ephemeral ideas of exhibitions in some abandoned houses. And I decided to ask if I can make some piece where other people begin to make, you know, at the beginning of the 90s, all the artists became to leave the painter and to came to the installations. And I think it's important to have something for me in that moment when I begin my career. So finally, I was in place and I make this like empty space. I mean, I make these holes in the walls, in the two walls, and then show how works the structure of the building and how want to be the house. For me is important in this talk with this piece is about this kind of work that in the first, maybe in the first moment nobody see it, but with the past, with some reflections, can be growing up. Because in the day of the inauguration, some curator from England that came to see Gabriel Orozco, that is a friend of mine, and she was in the wall, asked me where is my piece, because she didn't see where is my piece. I mean, she see in the paper is my name, and I say, you are in the piece. I mean, it's back of you, and it's this hall, and this is architecture, this empty space. This is the first exhibition, and we go to other exhibitions in that day in a very important museums. And finally, in some cocktail, this woman tell me that she likes my piece for many reasons. But the important thing is how this piece was not, she didn't see it before. And then when I explain, and then what happened at the times is growing up. And I think it's important for the work I want to make. At the same time, in that moment, in 96, they invited me to make a exhibition in some gallery for contemporary art. They asked me even if I want to make some drawings, models, photographs of my architecture. I was almost beginning, and I decided only to make a hall. I make a hall that you see in that you see here, 45 centimeters, and is only some hole that it cross 7 walls, and begin to make a different experience with this house that becomes to be a gallery, and then becomes to be a new experience with this little hall. So finally, you can have these little circles like a painting, but when you are in the center, you begin to have a relation with the different spaces. Even the idea is how can you even use the closet or use the bathroom and see the tree and see the different spaces and light in the spaces. The idea is how can you even touch with the view 2 different trees, that even these 2 trees are not in the house. One is in the street and the other is in the other house. My first important project, when I have the ask of the first government of the city of Mexico, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas was the first left-hand man in the city. He asked me, he wants a young man to make in some places to make something for marginal people. So we begin to work in some spaces with almost no money, but finally, after 5 or 6 projects, he decides to give me a school of blind and visually impaired. Was important for me because first of all, it was an important and big project, but the more important thing is how can you make a building without view? I mean, how can we work with the other sense? So for me, it's important the concept in the buildings, and then I begin to say, okay, how can we have these effects about smells, about touch, about sensorial conditions with contrasting the light, because there are almost the people in Mexico, in Iztapalapa, they are in a very marginal zone. They have problems with the view. The most of them, they can see a devil see view, but finally, how can we work with that? This is in Iztapalapa, that is a very poor area, and close to the subway. So finally, we decide this land that is here. We have the first problem. The kind of things that I like to talk is about how we can work with a problem. In this case, we have 1 meter and 80 centimeters of garbage of the other construction. It's like a corruption decision between these people and the government to leave here all the garbage of the construction. So I don't have the money to put out all this, and I decide just to move the 70% of the land to make a new territory, to make a new topography of the place. So we here is the construction. We make like a very big wall with gardens, and we make like a very rational building. I have to confess that in the beginning, when I make this model, my friends, artists, architects, begin to say, well, this is not an attractive model. They don't say, wow, what a nice building. I was in problems, I think so. But finally, one day, the director of the ONCE, or Organization of Blind People in Spain, came to give money, and he was blind, and we can put out all the roofs of the model, and with the finger he begins to walk in the place, and then he see, oh, nice space. He came to the view, and here is a patio, and here is a stairs that you can go to one part to the other. So he begins to have experience with the space, and I begin to understand that maybe I was not wrong with my first ideas. So here is the building. I mean, you don't have windows as a traditional building. We begin to work with other materials. Tepetate is a land material, but that is almost like a stone. They use it in the center of Mexico for making houses for 1 or 2 floors, and we use it for 14 or 15 meters high. And we begin to use the condition about some material that is the skin, in this case the tepetate, and the structure inside that you can see. So finally we can begin to use these traditional materials in other way. And the stone, the volcanic stone that is in the floor in Mexico City. So I will not talk a lot about the building, but finally it's about how can you really cross and see different spaces, like a very important plaza or patio, and then how can they have their own vegetations and patios. Here you have more like a public space, like a mixed space and a private space, and a sports and cultural and pool space, like a swimming pool. And then finally you have this line about sound, because all the water comes and breaks, and sound depends where you're crossing the spaces. The experience, how can we have different textures in the materials with not that much, I love a lot about Louis can say about using not too much materials, and how can only with 3 or 4 materials we can make stone, tepetate, and concrete to make the light about different heights and different experience with light and shadows and textures. That's why we use this kind of different heights, 210, 36, 45, to begin to have this space to the flowers, to the smell of flowers that we have here, and then some kind of skeleton that have more windows when you have this public space that with a mixed people, family, and professors that can see in this space, and then where all the blind people can have more the education rooms, and then here is more dramatic, the idea about shadow and light. Here is the plaza, and here we have the water. When cross the water sounds, and you know that you can cross where sounds the water. And then when you can sit with the shadow of magnolia that have some smell, and just have a good time there. It's nice when I was with all these blind people talking about the story, to be there, because they cannot see an image. So it's nice how they say, I like this story. So finally, we begin this with that. And then how can we make some texture with this material? Then they can just feel it and don't fall around, because the government say you need to put something here they cannot get to the water. But finally, they can really, only with this texture, stop to know it's not a place to walk. The idea is about the same roof with 9 columns. In some cases, depends the programs, you have windows, because here you have a gallery. And here you have the rooms, the workshops, and then here maybe you can have light, but not like a traditional window, and then you can cross air and have the different spaces to have the different workshops. It's important in my country, if you don't have good building constructors, and you know they're going really fast and making very fast the work, to make some materials that you know the accident is not a problem. So finally, we found how to make the tepetate with the same material we make these lines, and then it's not important how very good you can make or not the material. It's more important the textures and look at like a skin. In the interiors, we can see one more time the skeleton of the concrete, and then with very not expensive material, we can have a change it. You can have open or not open places to work in the office or in that spaces, and you can change it even with the time. Here, as I say, you have this high, but finally, even if it's not in good construction, you can have a texture. For example, this is the interior of the same space. You can look and see the structure, how it works between the tepetate, and here we changed the structure to find some beams to make the tension of this building, because we don't want columns. Here we will have places for sound, because it's at the library, and then here is like a more open spaces. So the structure helps to make the program. And then how can we make with some textures? West we have more like 7 inches, and then to east have like 1 inch, and vertical and horizontal, and then it's like some possibility to have some feeling with the building, with the hand for the blind people. And finally, how we make with 6 different colors of this vegetation to make a new experience with the space. I have to confess that when we make they came with the plants. I go really fast to smell, and I didn't smell anything. And I say, or it's an intellectual idea, or maybe I don't have good nose. But finally, in 2 weeks later, rains. And I come back, and I never thinking in the garden, but when I was there, I began to understand the colors of the space, and how can every space have different colors. 2 different colors in one color in other, a silence without color in other, and understand how come you can make space with this experience with smell. And not only for blind people, how can you do it? It depends the word you can make. Then this was 10 years ago or more, but later we have a new experience with blind people for a library in a pre-existing zone. It's a building we make. It's a building that becomes a library for different architects. Makes a new experience, and we decide to make these 2 spaces for blind people. This was the first space they had before. It was a terrible condition. So finally, they asked us to make the library, and to not make columns, one more time we make these boxes. So finally, the people can be here to make a sound book inside, and then can walk in the first floor. We make one more time a garden with the smell that you can be heard there. It's important that all the people, not only the blind people, go to this place, and it's a possibility to have a connection between not only the blind people, all the people who go to all the libraries. And finally, we have this space to blind people. We use different colors in the wood to make different experience. And then we use the yellow. They can see really the yellow. So finally, it's like an abstract painting, but they really can have for help the lines, to help the steps. And when with some braille, they can even here read some lectures. The child can be in some places in the yellow. So maybe the blind child, or maybe the child of a blind man. And we even make the furniture for the people. And then we use some sound here, because they asked for make some artist pieces, but finally we only use sound. So we have 9 sound artists to make some pieces, so people really can ask to hear the piece, or even hear other poetry or other book. They are acoustic walls, and there is the inside. How can they really work with sound control? No? Here is the drawings. My brother is a sound artist, and he was the one who invited other artists to make the sound in different places. We make an intervention, or the ephemeral intervention, in a church that now is a museum. They will put out the floor, because they put this floor because, in Mexico City everything goes down because it's the leg. So finally they say we don't care if we don't have a right floor, but we need the original floor. And the curator tell me if I can use this material to make something. So I use the same material just to move, and in 2 weeks with the workers of the place, I make like just a connection between all these pieces, and just make these tents to make this like a piece that the people can walk inside and have a new experience with the place. The idea is how can, with the same material, you can, even with the same workers, that they are just people who work for the museums, you can make something that works without money. This is a building we make for a poor area that is Milpalta. It's a warehouse. We make one more time. We have the stone of the place. We have the volcanic stone. The old houses are making by stone. So how can we make a workhouse with this material and with light roofs to make with not expensive budget to make a place that the carpenters and painters and the people who work for the municipal place working there, because this is a water canal. So how can we use the more space we can use, and how can we have the north the most of the time? Finally, we use this material one more time. The skin is important. No matter if it's not good the resolution. The important is to recognize some skin. The idea is this is a very chaotic place. Everything is changing. This is the sea you can see in the place. So finally, you need to make a strong building for that. This is the interior, and for me it's very important this image, because how it works. In one is the skeleton, that is these little points, vertical points, and then you have these vertical elements that is the stone, and the horizontal element that is the light. The lighting roofs, and then the light and the windows are the connection between all the materials. And finally, you can see how works the place. Outside has to be very careful about the security. This is not intervention. This is a photography of a beautiful, the process of a beautiful sculpture of the Ruta de la Amistad in Mexico City that makes Fonseca, that is a Uruguayan sculptor. But I love to make, and then some curator begins to ask to make some experience of artists inside of the sculpture because it's empty inside. So I decide to use the same material. And then, how can I ask to some constructor to give me for some 2 weeks this material that is the wood, and then he only tell me don't cut, only use it. And finally, we make a model and make inside with 2 people in 1 week and a half the opportunity to make these stairs to go to the top, but not only to go to the top. The idea is how can you finally have the experience of work inside, and how can you make all this? Only the rules, the concept of the rules, and then the worker begins to make the solutions. And then, because that, I begin to understand if you have some strategic and concept to make a building, they ask me to make a market, and I decide to make a market as a tianguis. And how can you make the tianguis? The tianguis is about, this is the place, and the tianguis is about using these horizontal platforms to make the wind comes and the sun not get inside. And finally, how can you use 6 by 6 square elements and then use it 3 different heights? And if you use 3 different heights, you can even make 10 models different, and it's the same building. Finally, we make the building. We only make louvers when you have the west and the south, but at the same time, the wind comes between the northwest to the southeast, so all the wind can come from the louvers, but not the sun go inside. And then in the east and in the north come the sun. Finally, you can have very nice light. You even don't need to use not really, they use the artificial light because they have a nice light. And in the other condition, you have these accident roofs, and then at the same time, you can have this accident in the interior of the place. Important to say that even in the Milpalta, all these informal houses are growing up every time they are changing because they have more money to make the floors. So finally, you have the same vibration between all the city and the building. So how can you make a contemporary building in these informal zones? Works. And then, finally, it's a contemporary building, but at the same time, works with the program and with the texture of the 5 facades of the city. Casa Saavedra is a little house we make with 2 materials, only with structural windows and concrete. We, one more time, use 6 by 6 and make 3 by 3 the different steps with all the topography. And finally, to make a house that is with 1 modulation, and you can have a place to go outside every roof, and be really with the same texture of the topography of the place. The idea is how important is to make, to understand the skin with the skeleton, and how sometimes you can open the concrete and you can see the elements that are really making the work of the structure. Okay. The School of Art the School of Plastic Arts in Oaxaca is Francisco Toledo is an important painter that works a lot of things in Oaxaca. He invited me to make this school in the University of Oaxaca. This is a ram earth building. We decided to use ram earth. We were working with the same people that in Arizona are making the buildings of Rick Joy and other architects, and asked them if the earth in Mexico working for this? Because even in Mexico is the earthquake, so how we study to make this building with these conditions. So, well, finally, we can make it. It's important that this building that is 2,500 square meters, maybe the rules inside of the university can give you the opportunity to make this building, because if you go with the government, nobody have the rules for ramp earth. So what happened in our country is that sometimes we can have the opportunities that if we convince, because we have the numbers of the construction and the engineers, we can talk and do it. Okay. We begin to understand that the school can be like emptiness spaces and the workshops, because we have different workshops. We make one more time earth behind. We move earth to make a space, and then to make a double space between the studios and the patios. Here is the place, here is our school. We found that some earth, they will live from this place of water. We use it to change the topography. Here is the place we work, and finally we move the earth and make this, like a garden with abstract buildings. You can see here how works the place. It's open to the north. You can this double space with the tree, and then you never see the other studio. You can cross the air, and you have a very nice temperature. Even in Oaxaca, it's very hot, warm. Here's the building. Here is the process how we make the building. We came with the stone of the place to make the buildings that touch these movements of earth, and in the center we make the buildings of from earth. We don't have all the money in the beginning of the construction, so finally we convince them that we can make 3, and in the process of the construction to ask to make the other ones. So finally we have to use some strategies to find the money, to know how in Mexico you can find money in the process, and that's why in 1 year finally we design and make the construction of the building. Here you can see how works this year the construction of the place, and finally you have the school. As I say, we use ramp earth and stone. The principal building is in the center. We make a hall. It's more talking as Monte Alban, making this negative space, and then we make these concrete walls to make that we can help the earthquakes, and then we can make a new roof to make them a new walls of ram earth in the top. The idea is how can you make the construction of a system, and a very heavy walls of traditional conditions can be in a very gravity conditions. But the more important thing is about experience. How can we go inside and have, even if we go from the topography to see the building, you can walk from the topography, and then come to the different spaces. It's one more time important, the contrast between light, shadow, the blue of Oaxaca sky, and it's very important the material. The material gives you the profundity of the material and the process of how can you make this material. Finally, one more time, we use concrete and ram earth, not other material. And then how can you have different experience with the shadow, because as one more time I said, we don't want the sun for the people outside. And how can you have a different experience every patio with one tree and the movement of the shadow in all the day. And how it works with the material of the ram earth. It's important, and we see in Casa Saavedra how can works the windows as a structure. You have all these walls here in stone, here in Rambert, and then you have only this roof, but this is a simple, put it simple there. I mean, you don't have a really connection between the roof and the walls. You can see here. Or here. It's not a boxes. Finally, you have different horizontal and vertical elements that works together, and then only with all these windows as a structure make the final exercise of construction. Here, finally, is how this is for me like an open book. How can you begin to use these traditional materials to make with gravity, with the construction of a system, and new opportunities of contemporary architecture? One of my last projects is a cultural center in San Pablo. It's important here that they found a convent in the city that nobody see before because it's with construction inside. This is Oaxaca. It's very, very close of the center of Oaxaca. I mean, only 2 blocks. And they find, my client, they find that here you have a convent, but the convent was in construction and it's a hotel there that you'd never see the construction of the convent, and then here you have many constructions. Here is the facade of 19th century of the hotel, and you never know that behind here is a convent. We found historical drawings that here is the historical convent of 17th century, and it's a walking space between one street and another. Here is the persistence of the ruins of the convent, because in the 19th century, in the age of Juarez, they put this street and break part of the convent. So finally, because they don't have all the convent, they begin to make a construction inside to make other programs. Unfortunately, they begins to buy the properties and begin to make like empty spaces here. Here was like a parking place inside of the block that was the facade of the convent. We begin to make out the materials of the new buildings, and then finally we make the restoration of the building. But my client asked me to make a contemporary architecture, to make it in the program. He says the square meters that I put away, I needed one more time for the program. So finally, I was only having the walking space of the convent. So finally, I make like a coupon tour of with a not heavy material here to make a library, and then this is the 17th century building, and then in a 20th century building, I make other. Because we begin to make empty here, we make other building, the same acupuncture of contemporary architecture, to make a gallery. And then in the 19th century building, that was a house, we make a restaurant, and one more time we make a new addition to make then with 21st century the connection between all the centuries. And here is a place. In a private space, we make a public space. Now in Oaxaca, everybody can walk in this space. We make different patios in the pre-existing spaces. And here you can see, here was the hotel. We begin to put out all the walls of that hotel, because there was then a little patio, and we became to understand in other layer the other patios, and finally to put the new structure to make like a contemporary building, but very transparent, that you can see the old building. So finally, you can see the building, but in the other hand, you can use part of the patio to the library. You can see here how it was in the beginning, and then how finally we make the building. It's with a lot of people, of historical reconstruction people, with very many people working in this project. you can see here the process, and then finally they have 3 floors. We put out the last floor, and then with new technology make a very not heavy roof to make like a place to use in the top. And here is the library. And then it's nice because it's the pre-existence, the new part, and all this a new space. And then in the top we can have you can open and move this roof to have depends of the moment of the day, because the sun you can manipulate to never have the sun inside. Here you can see it's open, here it's closed. We use a new fontaine that was where is the pre-existing fontaine, and we use obsidiana, that is a black stone, with a little water to make it like a mirror. You can see here. And then this is the polemic part, because we finally have, as I said before, this breaks. They make this street, and then we found, even when they are making this street, that we have this persistent place, but they will put one more time the street, and we convince the client that we don't need this 19th century. This is not anymore an hotel. We need to find that this was a convent. We cut the convent and find that finally we have to understand that this is the cut between the circulation part of the patio and the rooms of the 17th century building. That's why, finally, we decided to use a more abstract and new facade that is contemporary, but at the same time talks about the moment of the cut. This was other very poor building that they want to be colonial, and we only change it, but in this case we want to be very without protagonist. Inside is a very nice and beautiful contemporary 20th century place, so we change it, only clean it to change it to a gallery, and open to the place. So finally we put the new building to open one more time the building to the new space. And in the other hand, we have this little house to make a restaurant. So finally, we make one more time a roof to make a shadow for the restaurant. And then, how can you make a deconstruction when you go inside and make one more time a contemporary space to make like a portico to see the space? Or the connection between the convent and other buildings. We have to one more time have to put out away some part of the building to make the connection and to make that you can see one more time the wall of the convent. So finally, that's how we begin to make all these different spaces. It's important in Mexico because the most of the buildings that we have historical buildings and with very strict rules, nobody can use it. And with this kind of buildings now, they know that with acupuncture, with a strong contemporary architecture, you really can change and make new programs of this and of many buildings that you can use in Mexico. Many people have these buildings in Mexico and they don't use it, and they let the time goes down because they cannot do nothing with them. But with this kind of new rules, they can really change the programs for the projects. They use it a lot. This building is a very good energy in the building. I will talk about the Sound Pavilion. Is a little place. They asked me with my brother to make like a piece of art, because this was 7 contemporary artists to make something in a museum of Ricardo Legorreta. But because I am an architect, they say, please go outside to the garden to make your part. They tell me, why don't you use this pre-existing zone, that this was like a short practice for the soldiers long time ago, to make the building of Sound Pavilion. But I found this wall, and I found this tree and these stones. And I say, this is a better place to make the pavilion. And then I have only $40,000 to make the building, so if I only can make this wall, a roof, and a shadow, and the speakers for the sound that my brother makes with the sound of the birds, to make only a place to think. And some little halls for our children and for our tall men and for many people between the stones that you can see even the landscape of outside. Finally, it's almost like the same of the pre-existing wall, but with a little elements that let you know that it's a new building. One more time is the idea about, some people say, I didn't see your pavilion because I only see some stone walls. But one more time, I prefer sometimes to make that risk. Because if you can see this hall and understand that this is not the same wall that one, this is the pre-existing wall, this is a new wall, and then you go inside and you see the shadow, you begin to hear the sound of the birds of my brother, and then you can see that you have only a place to sit and a place to have these little holes of light. You can have new experience with the place. And finally, one more time, the pre-existing is not only that wall, pre-existing wall, it's the tree, is the two stones, and how we, with contemporary architecture, can make with only three elements a new experience with the space. I have finally three different buildings that we are working now. Here we're working in Ensenada, close to San Diego. It's a beautiful place. We are making some different buildings, and then later we invite like 50 people from over America Latina, United States, to maybe of my generation or more bigger, to make some buildings in houses, because we want to make 1,000 houses. We want to make the opposite of Ordos. I mean, not to make a different experience, it's to make with the same rules, with the same materials, something that you really in the space will find the architect. This is the idea. And we are making now the first buildings. This is like the first place we are working as a binary here, and some places that we will work in the place. It's something that is growing up very slow. Here is the winery. It's a place that we need to put down to the ground because the temperature is a little winery. Finally, we use one more time three materials with a little light. Here is the place between the viñedos. How it works is with gravity you can make the wine with the temperature. And the important thing is how can even you make the regulation of light of the place. Some views are a beautiful place. And then they asked us to make a little nomada hotel. So finally we use some tents and some boxes of wood to make a hotel in the place. That is now well done. Many people go there. And we are making a new hotel. This is some renders. I don't like not to show renders, but and finally we are making some swimming pools, and the connection, the topography with the stones of the place. And we make because they begin to make weddings in the place. They say we need 4 bathrooms for men and 4 for women to the weddings. So make something. So we decide to make something that begins to be part of the winery and the little place that we're working in the place. So we use the topography one more time. We make a patio, and finally this is the part of the bathrooms, and you wash your hands in where the water can make a sound here. We use some plants, water plants. And then here you have the experience. How can you walk in some places? You can go up to the new buildings we will make later, a place to sit before you go to the bathroom. One more time, the experience about this. Here it works as a structure, but at the same time work with the light. You have a patio and an experience with the water in the finish. So finally, if you make a bathroom, I mean, it's a very modest program, but at the same time, you can begin to make a new experience with the opportunity you have with the client, with the place. And when you are in the top, you are not seeing the bathroom. You are seeing a garden of water with some sound. In process, and finally, we are making some courts in Michoacán. Michoacán is a very now problematic zone. I mean, it's a violent zone, narcotraffic zone, and they ask us to make a courts. And they were before no talking courts. They were more terrible the experience. So when they say we will begin with the open courts, we say why don't we make courts with gardens and with patios? So we make this it's almost finished. It's in Pátzcuaro, Michoacán. We use the stone of the place. I mean, here in some way comes the light, but nobody can go out of this place. And the security is that you don't have the space to go outside if somebody run, but at the same time you have some experience with light. So they ask to use the teja, some traditional materials. We say no problem. We can one more time. We can use the traditional materials to make something with them. And finally, inside, the idea is how can you have office where they walk to go to the court, and then have some experience. Depends on where you are in the place. Even more and more, we are working with light. For us, it's very important. How can you make as a photography the open more and more to or close to have the light in the material. This is other court. I only want to show how we are working. The people that is going to the court can come here, cannot go outside, but finally have some experience with the place. Not only if you are in prison or you are going in that kind of places, you can make experience with light, with the space. So that's what we are thinking. And finally, I am making the studio of my mother. She had his house that I made 25 years ago, but she said, I need an archive to make my, she make 100 square meters that is a more short land that you can use in Mexico to build something. They buy it 80 meters from his house, and she wants a brick tower, she say, but she say, I need a brick tower. I don't want to see outside, but I need a nice space to make my my studio with my things. So we decided to not use concrete. We use some tents to make the celosía of light. Here, this is the process, and then you have 3 floors that only in the line of the land we put up the brick, and open the brick only when you don't have houses behind. And finally, it's like a tower, but finally you have 2 patios inside. You have experience with light, one more time. Here is in the back the light. So with this idea, you have the space open to 2 patios. And a new experience. That is, one more time, it's important. We make this brick in Cholula. This is very close to Mexico, 2 hours from Mexico. It's cheap in Mexico to make that. The hand of Mexico is, we can use it. These workers never work with brick, but they learn in 1 month, and finally they make this in 6 months. To make finally a small space, but with very important opportunities with the traditional materials we have. So finally, the only thing I want to say is how in different projects we use different materials, but the idea is how can these materials can be changed with new technologies, with new engineers' opportunities to find the reconstruction and to make some dignity of the space, depends of the programs. Thank you very much.
I can start, I guess. From conversations with Barry, I think that perhaps maybe we have more questions rather than necessarily a formalized response. And I mean, to me, it's really kind of a thrill to be here with you because I very much admire your work and the kind of, oh, sorry. It's a great experience to be here with you because I admire your work very much, and I've kind of thought about your work for a long time, and there's some questions that perhaps maybe might seem trite to most people, but having the opportunity, I figured that I'd ask them. So it seems to me that one of the things that you discussed in your work that seems to be kind of important has to do with the role of the arts, and it seems that I think anybody from your generation, and somebody particularly that studied at the UNAM, that the notion of plastic integration is something that one has to respond to. And to a certain extent, you've done it through the earliest kind of cases where you were, creating those voids or adding the Tatlin Tower inside Fonseca's tower. And I wondered, how do you explain, your relationship to the arts within the later projects? Because the earlier ones are very clear, artistic interventions. You're reacting to Gabriel Orozco. You're kind of working within that context. And I wonder if there is a way of producing, a way of acting, a way of designing that keeps in mind the kind of social vocation of the artistic experience within the architectural kind of realm.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's here? It's okay? Well, I have a problem when I finished my high school. I was worried because when I was a child I wanted to be an architect because my father was an architect, but later on I say no, I don't want to be an architect because if you are an architect you are a bourgeois, and you are scared about working as an artist, as I see in many of my story, because my mother is a photographer. She was very close with Álvarez Bravo. I see Álvarez Bravo all my life when I was a child. My father was divorced. It's important to say that. When I say that in one hand, and in the other hand, Gabriel Orozco was my brother because he lives in my house when we were a child. I like how he begins to work as an artist. My brother was a musician. In the house of my mother, when I began the university, I was in architecture, but I was saying I finished architecture and I go to cinema or to conceptual art or other things. I see in the house of my mother Joseph Kudelka, Sebastián Salgado, a very great photographers, and see how they begin to work, talking in the books they are doing, talking about condition of the contents of what they make. And then later of that, when I decide finally to be an architect, my father says, don't be an architect because I am an architect. Because he said, okay, don't be an architect because I am an architect, but don't live to be an architect because I am an architect. So finally I make the school of architecture. Unfortunately, I didn't came with books of architecture. I began to go to cinema a lot and a lot of artist connection with my friends when I was artist. And when I finished the school, my mother said, please make my house. I make the house. It was a nice surprise to me, make architecture. But even in the 90s, I began to make more interventions that architecture is obvious because I was young, I don't have not many houses to make or other things. Gabriel comes to New York. He asked me if I can have the studio in there, and he comes back home, and so the relation strong with him and with other young artists like Damian Ortega, that now is my best friend. Mm-hmm. And then all the time I was thinking in other way. But with the time I begin to make architecture, when I make the market, I say, wow, this is a conceptual piece, but a wonderful because it's in the city. So I begin to understand that if I have to look the architecture in other way, it's coming to get good for me. And now with the light, it's happening with photography. If you came open and close, the architecture is like using the camera. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So you use the operations of conceptual art or minimalist art, like for instance the model that you made for the school in Oaxaca, for example. It's very much kind of indebted to that notion of the solid void, the relationship of movement through them. It's something that you think about as your.
When you say the plastic relation de la UNAM, I was with Francisco Toledo, that I really is a very good artist in Mexico, even more as a conceptual artist, because what he make as acupuncturist in Oaxaca with his buildings, he make interventions, he make a great spaces. And we ask if he can make some intervention in the School of Arts. And we begin to talk and say it's not important. The important is to talk of ideas. It's the way that artists and architects can begin to work different than in the 50s.
Like I said, I have a bunch of questions, so I can keep going. One more question, which is the other thing that I think that again, architects of your generation have had to respond to, is the so-called fathers of Mexican architecture. And I have a lot of friends that are from your generation that Barragán was both the kind of reference point, but also the point of the turning away from Barragán. And then, of course, you have your own father, who's an architect, and I believe that you just made an intervention into his cineteca, no? Mm-hmm. How is it responding for you to the fathers of Mexican architecture? Do you kind of acknowledge and kind of have them in the back of your mind, or do you actually have a dialogue with their architecture?
I think the other generation back of me was very fighting versus Barragán and the Mexican architecture. They want to be more international, no? Like in the painter is la ruptura, that they want to break with the Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros. In our case, we finally don't have that problem. I think Barragán, one more time, is important. It's not about Mexican architecture. It's about emptiness. It's more about these are the risk of don't see the form of the architecture. That's why it's important. But now, because the world is more big, because you can see what's happening in all America Latina, it's more about for us, for the new generation, it's more about how you can work with the crisis. How can you work with not too much elements, with economical problems? And you can see in Brazil, in Venezuela, in different cities, a very strong architects to work with that. And maybe some of them, they are not the classic architect, but as Lina Bobardi. No? Lina Bobardi is not the classical architect, but more and more is strong now. For me, it's very nice in this exhibition to see how Lina Bobardi was maybe the last point of the exhibition. Is the Cesc Pompeia is this kind of a very strong work that is talking more about other things than the form. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of relations are important for my generation.
Do you find yourself to be in dialogue with people like Solano Benitez or Smirjan Radic and people from Rosario? And I mean, for instance, when you showed the studio for your mother, for example, I thought, Benitez is working something similar.
Yeah, I say to him that I have to make something in break, but we have to know. But I think I make something different. Okay. I wish. No, I am very close with Solano Benitez, with Carla Ubancaba, with Pontoni and Vegas in Brazil, and with the people, Rafael Iglesias when he was good. And I mean, because we talk a lot in different parts of. We begin to talk with some people that we make a very similar conditions of working in different places. But finally, there are not too many. But you can find a very strong men in different countries in America Latina that we are very close now together with political and ethical ideas about architecture.
Okay, keep going. Please you.
Well, first of all, thank you for both the reflections, but also, obviously, I think with your photographic background, even the photographic images of this work are quite extraordinary. But there are a number of themes, and I'm trying sort of off the cuff to weave them together. I thought it's so poignant in your presentation to move from the first intervention of really creating a camera lens cut through an entire house to then move to the problem of, which is all about vision and about transforming vision in the smallest way, so somewhere between a camera obscura and a camera lens. I think much more than Matter Clark, which comes to mind, but then is really not what the operation is about at all. And then to move from that to trying to think about an architecture for the non-seeing or the barely seeing is a very a poignant move. And it's just, I'm wondering what you think. I thought there were two big themes in the work that might relate to the shock of being asked to do a first major project at a large scale for the non-seeing. One had to do with your comment about the negativity of space, negative space, and how does one perceive space in through the other senses other than through vision. And then, of course, throughout your work, the absolute intensive tactility of your work was very striking to me. And then finally, the third theme that I think is related to this, is looking at it as an art historian, is this extraordinary control of light that is minimized. So rather than, up here in the north, we try desperately to throw open everything and get as much light in, and you control light through these very, very careful small apertures and then dramatize and use it. And I couldn't help, I just want to ask you what you think of this, I couldn't help but think about something that is completely remote from what you're doing, but that relates to all of these themes, is this beautiful statement that Goethe made about his own house. And he said he would so love to take a blind person through the spaces of his house and have them at the end recount those spaces to him so that he could experience the way a non-seeing person would experience a sequence of spaces. And I thought of that early on when they moved from the eye to the institution for the non-seeing, and then I thought, I just wanted to ask you, you probably don't know that story, but I just kept thinking of it in the sequences of the spaces and, where you're controlling things and where you're thinking about the tactility of a ramp and a tightness and a constriction. So I just wonder if you could tell us the impact of having that extraordinary mission for somebody who's the son of a photographer.
And he's a very accomplished photographer as well, too. Yeah. He is.
What I said before, but what I really learned about as a grandfather, Alvarez Bravo, because he was close with my mother and with my mother too, is about, first of all, about the only way to make good photography is to be all the week just thinking, talking with smart people, and have ideas. And not the not important thing is the formal finish, even in photography. More and more when I making my work, I don't care about forms. The form is the conclusion, but the really question is about the experience. Obviously, it's about the experience, about tectonics, about light, about. And in Mexico, we have different condition of sun, different condition of temperature. So every land gives you to different parts. Every land gives you to different materials. And if you really can look the place and understand the place, in some way you are having a new opportunity to make the experimentation to make that. I have to make this reference. I was in Texas. And I see the piano intervention of the Kindle and the Louis Kahn, between the Louis Kahn and Kindle. And I respect a lot piano, but I really love the work of Louis Kahn. And when I see the work between, I think it's not fair to make it together. And I think it's a big distance between Louis Kahn and Renzo Piano, because Louis Kahn, this is one of the last work made Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn really can cut the space. The more important thing, when I go the first time to the Kimball, I was disappointed. I was, this is not good. In 15, 20 minutes, I was crying. I think it's a very strong place because everything is about light. It's about the tense of the different atmospheres you see there. The work of piano is very correct. Is perfect. Is all this natural north light there that works very good. But the poetry is with Can. And I think everybody has to know where you want to go. My way, I know it's a very difficult way, but I want to be in the Louis Kahn work way. I mean, the opportunity that the emptiness is the important thing. And the opportunity that every place is a place, that you can use it, and you don't need not that much money to make a good building. You need ideas. That's why maybe if I have to decide between Picasso and Duchamp, I prefer Duchamp, because I think working with ideas, I like a lot Picasso, I like a lot Renzo Piano too, but the idea, that I really learn about the work of Duchamp, and they say Joseph Beuys, obviously, is about the strong thing that you can work behind what you are making. And I really love the work of Tarkovsky in cinema. Mm-hmm. I was almost going to cinema, and when I was in the University of Architecture, I only see the movies of Tarkovsky. And I love that work because you don't have to move the camera. You can put the camera and you can see the wind goes to the landscape. And that strong is the real risk I think I want to make with the work. And that's maybe why I didn't know the story about the blind people in the house, but I like it a lot. I mean, how can somebody can really have, and I didn't know Johannes Palasma. I met him because we were juries in Quito, and then I really read one more time his book, and I really love this idea about that the directed light, the directed view is I don't know how to say in English, but I mean that is superficial, and the important things about the peripheral idea, and how then I say, okay, my mother is a photographer, so he make a director, but not. How come she makes something with the photography, or Kudelka, or Albert Bravo? It has to be what is happening in the place. The important thing about a photographer is not only to make photographies, it's about what is happening, and then something happens. And the magic comes of the poetry comes if you are close with that. My mother was in Juchitán making photography for indigenous people. It's not that easy, but he was like 4 or 5 weeks with the people, and then finally she disappears with the camera and begins to have a relation, and that's why I think the some strong with the photography. And I want to learn about that. And when I go to some place and talk with even in the marginal place with the people, and to understand how they, that's why I don't understand when the provocative could have said fuck the context, because for me the context, the place is opportunity.
Let me ask you, you mentioned specifically Lina Bobardi and the exhibition ending with some renderings of Cesc Pompey, and then right in the immediate area of that there are a number of other projects less well known of Lina Bobardi, notably for housing that involves self-help and participation, rather extraordinary, but out of that, the idea that somehow a stronger community focus might be created. And as you were speaking, I was looking at the forms, I was thinking of this sub-theme of arquitectura pobre, which becomes more and more a theme in the critique of heroic modernism in the 70s. I was thinking of Dieste too, and in the moments in your work, and that beautiful idea he has that you can take geometries of an engineer and render them so that they can be made by someone who doesn't know anything about those geometries. So I have a very specific question. In that very beautiful art school in Oaxaca, you didn't really talk about how the different materials come together, and I wondered what is the relationship between the concrete and the rammed earth? What is the relationship, therefore, between this absolute hand technology, handcraft material, and the technology of it, if you had thoughts about that, because that building seemed to me to ask for that question.
Yeah. Well, we as I told before, we begin to study the ram earth because we begin to see beautiful pieces of ram earth, not only in the history of Peru and Mexico and other parts. We begin to see that even in Arizona with Free Joy, and even Peter Zumthor make a little church there with this material. And so finally we go to the place and find the people who can gave us to know how to use this material, ram earth. So my client in San Miguel Allende, not in Oaxaca, begin to come some people from ram earth to Arizona to make a workshop for a week, to make a spa in San Miguel Allende for a New Zealand woman. And then we have like this workshop for a week. How can you make a very nice wall of 60 centimeters, and you don't need columns of concrete inside. You can have it like that. I mean, and then when as other projects, San Miguel Allende goes going really slow, and then Toledo say we need to make a project in 1 year. Let's make it. And I say, why don't we make this ram earth? Because we begin to say with the people of Arizona, they can come for 3 months to make the first walls, and then later my people, the construction people can begin to make the last part of the project for the San Miguel Allende. But here we don't have time. So finally we say, okay, we know in this workshop how can we make it. I have a engineer that is very smart and aggressive in that way, and he begins to make some numbers, and he says, okay, let's make something, but we need 70 centimeters. But for the earthquakes, we only need one column of concrete because we need to make contact with the structural windows. Because it's simple way, the roof is simple way, and it's very heavy, but simple way, and only you need for the earthquakes this little element for the windows to help them, no? But in the other side you have the other wall that helps you too. So finally, the only idea was if we will make this column inside the ram earth or outside as we make in other projects, as in the School of Blind People. We decided to make inside, as they make it in Arizona. The only thing is you need to cut some parts for this is just aesthetic thing about. So finally, I have to tell you, because finally it was a big problem because we have political problems in this place, because there was some architect became to be the dean of the university or the director of the university, and he begins to see that I have prizes, and I was the first architect that came to the university that wasn't part of his group. So I'm making dangerous the opportunity they have all for 20 years to have all the projects. So he begins to say, no, this is going down, this is going down. So we have political problems. And I have to say that because in Mexico we have big opportunities, but at the same time it's very vulnerable, because I say, okay, make a very important technical discussion with the more good engineers of the zone, and they never want this because this was a political problem. So finally, he finished, even he makes some aggressive things to the building. And finally, the new dean became to say, okay, let's really make the things. And now we are finished to make good the school, and no problems, never was a problem. For many years, with many earthquakes, the school is good. But it's a big problem, because when you became to make something that is different, somebody that need other things can really, in Mexico, can be very aggressive, and you have to be prepared for that. No?
I think so.
I think we should open it up for questions or observations from you all. Ken?
I didn't know you worked at all. I find it...
You're getting a microphone coming down to you.
Yeah, I didn't know your work at all. I find it absolutely extraordinary and very stimulating. But the thing that struck me was this question of tectonic and technical invention, and the way that is also part of the poetic. That you said very quickly a lot of things. Sometimes I think you said that the windows, in fact, steel windows in one case, so much work at once, it was hard to keep it all in one's head. But the steel windows are actually performing structurally, And later you also, I think, said that timber, very beautifully worked timber louvers in another building, also working structurally. Or I noticed in the house with concrete, where you cut a piece out, I assume the pieces that are carrying through are maybe also steel. And this mixture of steel and concrete is something that, you find it in Mendes de Rocha, for example, in the school, in the Paulista school, that is sort of so rich, this inventive and technological capacity to mix these materials and in a way which is also technically right but tectonically expressive, and that's one thing. And the other thing I think is the use of very lean, advanced technology right by the side of walls that are rubble stone walls that are also very connected to the earth. So it passes from the earth through the walls, and then at the top there's a very lean. For instance, in the monastery, you quickly said that this cantilevered roof is using a modern technology, but of course we don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. It's somehow this constant oscillation between very sophisticated modern technique and the earth and walls makes the work, I think, extraordinarily rich, dense work. That's a comment, of course.
Mm. Oh, well, really, we are very. We need in every project the first idea is how can we make with our engineer, with the same engineer we work, the most time we can. How can we make the possibilities to make, I say, the construction, the gravity, the opportunity to make the materials in other conditions. In other way, we like to be the more how you say transparent with how works the materials. We don't need layers to make other things. We need to say this is how works the material, and that's why so many times we begins to say that the windows begins to be some little columns to help the place. And sometimes we, as you say, we cut the concrete, but as a drawing of Da Vinci how works the relation between the parts. The last project we make, I was in some moment I was fighting with my engineer because he says you are having many work and you are not concentrated. I will not work with you anymore. And someday I say to him, "It's the house of my mother. Come on, please come." And in one afternoon, because the other engineer begins to make some concrete columns in the patio, and I say, "This is not what I want. This is a conventional." So when I go and I say, "Okay, it's the house of my mother," okay. And then we walk one afternoon with some tequilas, I have to say, and when we found that with these little tents and with horizontal steel in the place, we can make the earthquake for a very light celosía, we found the project. And then after that, we begin to work one more time in all the projects. But what I had to say is very important for us. That's what I liked a lot, the relation with Solano Benitez or Carlos Giancava and other architects in Latin America, that in different ways, but in the same direction, we are working. We want to work, or we have the similar condition of working with simple elements, but with trying to make complex in the relation of the traditional materials and and the hands of our places, but at the same time with the intellectual that we can have in this open world we have now, that we are everything together, to make something in our places, no? And that's very important in our investigation. That.
Other questions? Freddie?
In spite of the fact that I think all the really extraordinary buildings you've shown, they all have a deep sense of locality, in the sense that although there's a diverse typology and they're very versatile, but they all feel very Mexican. However, there's not a trace of vernacularity in your architecture. And I think that one of the reasons is because, very strangely, in contemporary Mexican architecture, you dare use the whole spectrum of materials. You work openly with steel, with wood, with brick, with stone. Well, you might say that stone was let's say the more traditional material. Why is that? Do you think that has that got to do with your artistic beginnings, or do you have a strong link with, let's say, a very open modernity?
Well, when you are talking this, I remember that I was in the university when the postmodernism was in the most important moment in the 80s. Even my father, like in that moment, the postmodernists, everybody's in that. But fortunately, I have a good teacher, Humberto Ricalde, and we begin to talk about Scarpa. When we say postmodernism, I understand the postmodernism as Scarpa, not at Graves, not at others. What I really like to know about the local effects or what you have close is more about that kind of exercise that others. It's very easy, obviously, that if you are working with the traditional materials to make a vernacular or to make a caricatura. Caricature of something, no? So finally, it's very important every project to say how can this wall of stone or this wall of brick of this wall can be have the feeling of the tectonic of the material, but at the same time can have the time of the contemporary. We are all the time working in that, and I think has to be with the first idea, the conceptual idea of the construction of a system, and not a repetition of because the problem of the vernacular is about that you can, if you make the repetition of a system and you make the same that hacienda or the same as a pyramid, so obviously it's a pyramid or it's a hacienda, but the materials can go to other place. I think so.
One or two more? Anyone else a question, or do you have others that you wanted to ask? I know you were on the list. Yes.
I would love to ask about your experience at the Latin America exhibit today, and your work resembles a lot of different aspects of each of these great masters, Villanova Artigas in the sense of revealing the struggle, Lina Bobardi in the sense of community, Pablo Méndez da Rocha and the glass. I wonder maybe at what moments you felt great attraction and great connection with some of the projects? I
want to talk about, I was in the exhibition and I have to talk about some story of Mexico, about Ciudad Universitaria. You know, Ciudad Universitaria maybe is one of the best projects of modernism in Mexico, with O'Gorman and with Barragán. I think this is a strong moment. But I really want to remember something that I hear, I don't know if it's true, about Wright saying that the Frontones Abiertos and the Estadio was the more important buildings he see. And I have to say, because I have somebody, I see somebody who study, he make a thesis about Carlos Lasso. Lasso was the director of all the team. So finally, for me, more that Pani, more that the polemic about Teodoro de González de León and Pani, I think Lasso was the great man in that moment, and I will tell you why. When Miguel Alemán, the president, wants to go to see how was the construction of the university, and they see nothing there, and come on, is coming the president. Lasso say, come on, let's make the frontones and make it with the stone of the cimientos, ¿cómo se dice? The foundations. So come on, use these stones and make that. Okay, coming the president and everything is okay. And the stadium was a concrete stadium. And the Lasso comes and say, come on, the topography is excellent, great. Just make it with the topography. And came the stadium with the stone. And more good when I respect Rivera, but when Rivera, he was making all mural in all the stadium and he died and he only make a little thing, that's great too. Because then you can see the skin and you can see the strength of the material in the stadium. So finally for me too, these two buildings are very strong. As I say, Lina Bobardi's, for me, this kind, and obviously Artigas and Mendes de Rocha, when you see the heavy and the gravity of the decisions that has to be with politicals and energy of the places, is where I see the more strong buildings, in one hand. And you are talking about the exhibition. In the other hand, when you are talking before, when I see the drawings of Lina Bobardi or the drawings of Barragán, I was very surprised. These kind of drawings for me were very going outside of the architecture. And then you can see people that is not only thinking in architecture, it's people that have some culture, some ideas, and use the architecture as a herramienta, how do you say? Tool. As a tool to make a philosophy.
It's interesting. I just found this morning a text of Walter Gropius critiquing the campus in Mexico City. And he says, they just don't have any conception of space. All the spaces are too grand. It doesn't hold together, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, he's really blind, because the absolute amazing thing to me in that campus is exactly the control of the spaces through very subtle sectional moves on the edges. And I think one of the most interesting thing about the campus, if you spend time there, is there aren't that many incredible interiors that you remember. It is absolutely an extraordinary bound space where the buildings are more the creators of these large sequences of exterior spaces. So I was rather shocked by this text by Gropius, and I thought it's sort of interesting, this card-carrying SIAM member who can't really see that space. Anyway, sorry.
He was jealous.
Editorial intervention. Are there any other? There are a lot of compatriots of the architect in the room.
Somebody at the very, very end,
Yeah,
very top.
all the way at the back. Yeah.
I think.
Hi. When you talked about Oaxaca and the beautiful things that you're doing there, and they're smaller, medium scale, but what happens when you translate this model to the city, to Mexico City, when you need to build 1,000 units, or you need to build in a really dense place like in the center of Mexico? How do you translate your design from Oaxaca to these dense urban areas?
I think, first of all, I think obviously it's different, depends the city, depends the density of the city, the opportunities you have. Even in the Mexico City, you can see different, it's different to working in Xochimilco than working in the historical center or working in Santa Fe, this rich area, very not that great area. But what I really have to say is about who is your client. I don't know if about the city, but who is your client? Because for some reasons, the developers never came to me, never. They never ask me to do anything. But I think they are true, because I am not good at making maquillaje, ¿cómo se dice?
A makeup.
A makeup of buildings, and they working in that all the time. No, how can they be? Maybe some developer can, but not that much. So how can you make a big or a small building? Depends of the relation with your client, and it's not don't have to be with money, because I think we can make something with not that much money. The problem is the intellectual view. If you have some client, I mean the developer is having other mirror or other optic of how to make architecture. So when I was I have some French critical when I was 30 years old, and he see this hall in the gallery, and he begins to see my work. I was almost beginning. I don't remember the name of this critical architecture and art. He say, be careful with who is your client, where you want to make your work, in what kind of magazine, or who kind of writer will make something of your building, who you want to talk with your building, what you will never do with your work, even if they ask you and they put a lot of money in the contract. If you make a good decision, then I think you have some congruence with your work and your way. And I think this is important thing. I am not scared about doing, even in Mexico City or New York or Switzerland or wherever. Every place you go, you will find a new opportunity and new materials. And I have to say this because some people, and I will not say name, but some architects in Mexico, they are good, but they go to other country in other continent to make the same building. It's impossible. No, impossible, because I mean you need to understand the place and to understand new opportunities of a building. No. This is the commitment. Commitment. It's a commitment.
The one thing that, if I may, just one last, I know that everybody, housing. Your work is very much socially directed towards the poor people, public, socially. You only showed one house, which was a private house. What is your attitude towards public housing? Do you build public housing?
Yeah, well, now we are in relations, and they ask so many architects to make a new opportunity, because the group of government say, just ask new architects to make, the new generation to make public housing, and we are in that group, and we will see. I mean, for me, it's nice to understand, to make something. It's not easy, because the rules are really strong, and we have to know how to work with that. No, it's about political. It's not about architecture. I love house. I like a private house. I make a lot of private house. I have some of them, I think every program is good. The nice about architecture is that you can change program every year or every month, and it's important that.
So forthcoming from you is public housing soon? Yes.
Public housing soon, and in La Jolla I will make a house, a rich house. I mean, everything is okay. I mean, okay. And I'm making I want to make a good house in La Jolla, because I see that there can make a very good houses. So.
Amal, did you want to say anything to close the evening?
You mentioned quite a bit the sense of being part of a generation. The notion of being part of a generation that's different or approaching architecture different, and I was very curious to hear more about that. I mean, do you have a kind of group, and are you constructing a kind of discourse? Do you critique your work? Just kind of the friendship seems really important, and it's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. I think it really is a generation, but it's not a national generation. It's more about the people that you can be in contact. And it's true that maybe we are trip more to to America Latina and or to the States, that in Europe, but even in Europe, we found some people in Spain of our generation that we are together. Maybe Quito is a good place that we have together with some people from Spain and from people from Paraguay, Brazil, and maybe in Mexico with Arquín. I mean, it's some congress and possibilities that gave you the opportunity to have 1 week to talk with the people. And I find that it's incredible how we are in very close conditions to work, and we begin to help us, as now Solano is doing something in Asunción, and we will go to Asunción with some project he have, because we think it's important. And I have to say that in my case, it's important to the generation with the people who is doing conceptual art, because I think I have more close relation with these people of my generation, and it's very important to talk between us, I mean, these kind of discussions on we have with the architect, but at the same time with people of art. I think it's very important because it's about ideas. It's not about formal or what is the more big building or no, it's about ideas and about solutions. And I think it's very stimulante, ¿cómo se dice?
Stimulating.
Stimulate. And we have to provoke a lot this kind of relations. Because it's important, making a strong group. It's making a strong group.
Great. Well, I think we'll end there. We all now want to rush to the airport and fly to Oaxaca in Mexico City.
Great.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much for coming, and also thank you to
I will put the mezcal.
thank you to the school for suggesting this in conjunction with the exhibition. So.